beautiful song. Hasdei Hashem. The kindnesses of the Lord are so many. That's sung by Rabbi Eitan Katz. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we're getting started on this fine Wednesday evening? Paula from Chicago, Stephen from New Hampshire, Sandy says Michigan in the house, Pauline from Arkansas, Susan says hello from lockdown London. Welcome, Susan. We are actually putting together a little video that's going to help us reach more people with this show. And if you're tuning in from another country, please make sure to let us know in the comments. Even if it's, by the way, even if you're watching on the replay. And ideally, if you're tuning in from another country and it's a non-English speaking country, could you say a little word about why you love this show in your own language? And then we're going to feature these comments in that video that they're even coming in from other countries and other languages. And we'll have the English translation, of course, but it would be lovely to get some testimonials of people who love this show in other countries and to say so in your own language. That would be beautiful for us. Thank you. Randy's with us from Florida. Marie Claire says shalom from Scotland. Awesome. We got UK. We got Scotland. Melissa from Great Neck, New York. John is with us from Sedona. Patrice from Utah. Annie from Michigan. Lucy from Minnesota. John from Massachusetts. Nandy from North Carolina. Leah from Fort Myers in Florida. Chaim from Charlotte. Shmuela from Tacoma, Washington. Sammy from Dallas. Stephanie says Alechem Shalom. Ia, Hel, Handsome, Hod de Leon. Arieta says Shalom, friends. Greetings from Guatemala. Bienvenida. And Rochelle's with us from Modesto. Alana from Oregon. And Sharon from Lebanon, New Jersey. Welcome, everybody. Oh, I wasn't able to do this before. Let me make sure we're tuned in on YouTube. Yes, we are. And Lynn is with us from Texas. Welcome, everybody. Okay. Where are we holding? This is Daf Kuf Aleph. That's page 101. We're almost at 105, the last page here of Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. With God's help, we'll be making the siyum, the completion of this tractate this Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific, our regular time. It would be lovely if you could be with us to celebrate the completion of Tractate Eruvin and have a l'chaim, something to drink and a little something to eat. Usually, traditionally, something that's a grain product, a pastry, a muffin, something like that, so we can make a bracha over it and celebrate together that we've completed Tractate Eruvin. And of course, we'll read the first few lines of the next tractate immediately, since we're always studying. And the next tractate is Tractate Pesachim. Okay, so we're here at page 101. We're in chapter 10. And as I've mentioned a few times, there's a lot of Mishnas here in this chapter 10, this kind of final chapter where the sages are throwing in a bunch of additional concepts having to do with guarding Shabbos, keeping us from coming to perform prohibited labors on Shabbos, and enhancing Shabbos in its sanctity and the joy of Shabbos, things, decrees of the rabbis that will help us enhance the joy while protecting us from coming to violate Torah prohibitions. So tonight we'll be looking at Mishnahs 9, 10, and 11. 3 Mishnahs are getting covered in this one page. So let's get into it. The first Mishnah we're covering tonight, Mishnah number 9 here of chapter 10. With regard, and now the way I'm reading it is from the Koren Talmud. So it's the words of the Mishnah elucidated, meaning that we have from Rav Steinsaltz explanatory words sort of between the words to help us understand what the Mishnah means. So Mishnah number 9, with regard to the door to a rear court, i.e. a door that opens from a house to the courtyard that's situated behind it, which is typically not a proper door, but merely a wooden board without hinges that closes off the doorway. And likewise, bundles of thorns that seal a breach in a wall or a fence, and reed mats. One may not close an opening with them on Shabbos. This would be considered building or completing a building unless they remain above the ground even when they are open. So what is at stake here? What is the value that the sages are talking about and helping us to guard against? So obviously we can open and close doors, we can open and close windows on Shabbos. But in ancient times, they didn't have quite the window and door hardware that we have today. So sometimes there would be a situation where there was a small opening in a house that led into, let's say, the rear courtyard, and they hadn't built a proper door for this opening from the house. It wasn't a door on hinges. And so the question is, could you close off that door with something that is not a door? So that's the real issue here. And the problem is, if you're basically closing and opening in a structure in some kind of, permanent fashion, even if it's not going to be permanent, you don't intend it to be permanent, but it's not, you're not closing a door. You're attaching building materials to an existing structure. So it starts to feel like construction. And of course, we cannot do construction on Shabbos. That is a prohibited labor. That's a Torah prohibition, not just a rabbinic decree. If you come to violate a Torah prohibition unwittingly, then you become liable to bring a sin offering when the temple is standing. We don't have the temple now, so we can't bring sin offerings, but still it's a more heavyweight prohibition that you violated than when it's just one of the rabbinic decrees, most of which are basically meant to protect us from coming to violate biblical prohibitions. So if we, install like a wooden plank in this opening in the house, it's like we added to the house. It's like we engaged in construction, and then that is what is prohibited. But sometimes it's a little bit unclear. You'll recall that some months ago, and we're going to discuss this again in the third Mishna tonight, but some months ago we discussed what happens with a window, where in the old days, to close a window, you had a shutter, essentially a shutter, but it wasn't attached to the house on a nice hinge. Hinges were like premium hardware. It's not like everybody had access to hinges in the ancient world. So normally what you would do to close a window is you had a board that it was the same size and shape as the window. Now, Rabbi Yehuda said, okay, if you have that board and you want to install it in your window frame to close the window, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that was okay if it was attached to the house already in some way. Namely, like there was a rope on a peg attached to the wall, and the other end of the rope was on this shutter. Normally, the shutter is just hanging there on that rope. When you want to close it, okay, so you lift it, it's on the rope. You just lift it up and position it in the window frame, and that closes the window. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you had that shutter just leaning against the wall but sitting on the floor, and you picked it up and installed it in the window frame, that would be for him like construction, and he prohibited that on Shabbos. The rabbis disagreed. They said, no, it's clear to us that this shutter is just meant to go in and out of that window. We might be storing it, holding it on the floor of the house, but when we put this in the window frame, we're just doing something that's meant to go in and out of that window frame for the purposes of just closing it, and we're not adding new construction to the house. So we've dealt with this kind of issue before in the case of windows, and now we're talking about it in the context of doors. Okay. So that is the Mishnah which I read to you, and so now the Gemara right away brings a Baraisa which seems to disagree with the holding of the Mishnah, right? So the Mishnah basically is saying that you can use these things, right? You can use a door that's made out of a plank, maybe, or bundles of thorns. It's very interesting. You're going to use a bundle of thorns to seal a breach, like in a fence, right? This would be an effective way to stop people from coming through a hole in your fence if you stuck a whole bunch of thorny plants into that breach. So according to the Mishnah, so you may not close an opening with them on Shabbos. Right, let's just read it carefully. So just without the elucidation, the door to a rear court, and bundles of thorns that seal a breach, and mats, one may not close with them on Shabbos. This would be considered building or completing a building unless they remain above the ground when they are open. Above the ground when they are open. So a little bit like that situation of the window shutter, it seems like the Mishnah here, though, is holding according to what Rabbi Yehuda said back then. I think it was Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe it was Rabbi Eliezer. That might make more sense. Somebody remind me if you know what I'm talking about. But at any rate, so he's here, the Mishnah is saying that if this stuff is stored on the ground where you're not using it, so it can't be installed on Shabbos. But if it's somehow suspended in the air, like it's there and positioned and ready to go into the opening, okay, then you could do it on Shabbos. So now the Gemara brings a Baraisa which says seemingly the opposite. The Baraisa says some kind of a door or a mat or a lattice that they drag along the ground is nevertheless permitted if it's tied and suspended. So it's a little unclear. Well, dragged along the ground. When is it dragged along the ground? When you bring it here or when you push it into place? Or when it's in place, does that mean it's touching the ground? They said that it is permitted even if it drags along the ground, as long as it's tied and suspended. So a little unclear what tied and suspended means. Perhaps that indicates that it's somehow tied to the house or tied to the fence. It's tied up. It's, the thing itself is tied together. We're not going to be, we're not going to be fabricating anything on Shabbos. That's for sure. And it seems that it's necessary that it be attached to the house, but it's okay if it touches the ground. The Mishnah said it can't be touching the ground. Abaye says, okay, what we're talking about here, the difference between the Baraisa and the Mishnah, according to Abaye, is that these are objects that have a hinge, right? So if it has a hinge, okay, well then it's clearly attached to the house, and the Baraisa is okay with it if it doesn't touch, even if it touches the ground, as long as it has a hinge. Rava says it's even okay if it had a hinge. So that's interesting. So it had a hinge. It no longer has a hinge, but still it was obviously made for this location, even if the hinge is no longer there. So according to Rava, that's what the Baraisa is saying. It might be touching the ground, but at least it was already fabricated for this location. And even if it had the hinge before, but no longer has it now, it's okay. And so basically what they seem to be talking about is this object that you're going to use to fill the opening in the house is got to have, let me just have a drink of water here. It's got to have the form of a door, right? If it doesn't have the form of a door, if it isn't door-like, then it feels much more like you're doing construction. You know where we've seen this recently? I mean, it's a shame that here in 2020 there were so many protests and riots, etc., around the country and around the world when people were boarding up their windows. Okay, could you do that on Shabbos? Let's lay aside the question for a moment that if you were doing it to save your life. That's not what we're considering here. But could you board up a window on Shabbos? The answer, I think, would be clearly no. Because those boards were not there in place before for this purpose. You're bringing boards, you're cutting them, you're putting them in position, and you're nailing them in. That's clearly construction that would not be permitted on Shabbos. What if there's been a lot of riots for months, God forbid, and it's sort of like you've created boards that go into place quickly for your window to protect the window? Then maybe that would be okay to do on Shabbos since they've already been created, they're already fit to size. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer would say it needs to be suspended alongside the window, or it had to have a hinge at some point. Maybe the rabbis would say you can keep it on the ground. It's okay if you're just going to push it into place. But if you're going to hammer nails to hold those boards in place or screws, make bolts, things like that, that's no way going to be permitted on Shabbos. All right. Now the Gemara brings another baraisa, and this baraisa claims that this thing that you're bringing, a plank of wood, a bunch of thorns tied together, whatever you're going to use to fill that hole, it needs to be held in place above the ground. So the Gemara says, okay, well, we can reconcile Abaye and Rava's view with this new baraisa and say, okay, Abaye would say either this plank has a hinge or it's held above the ground. And Rava would say either it had a hinge at some point, if it doesn't now, or it's being held above the ground. Again, the issue seems to be that it has the form of a door and that you're not adding to the construction of the house. Rabbi Chia brings an interesting term. He says, we're not going to allow a widowed door. Now, when I first read that, sometimes, occasionally in these books, they put together so much knowledge in so many volumes. Sometimes the editors make a little mistake. And I thought, does this mean, he's not allowing a windowed door and they just left the N out? But no, he meant a widowed door. What is a widowed door? And there's actually a couple of explanations given. One is that it's a door that's missing a significant element, like a widow is missing her spouse. And what might that be? It might be the hinge is missing, or something that ties the so-called door to the house. There's some important element of a door missing, so that we look at it, it's like, yeah, that's not a door, right? Maybe it was a door at one time, but we can't say that in this situation that thing is a door. And a different, more metaphoric understanding of what a widowed door is, it's a door that's attached incorrectly, like somebody made a mistake, and somebody suggests maybe it's because, this widow, unfortunately, she lost her husband. He was the handy one around the house. She's just doing the best that she can, having never really used tools and done construction before. And so the door ended up attached improperly. At any rate, according to Rabbi Chia, no widowed door allowed. What is the halacha on that? It is prohibited to close an opening with a door built from a single plank or one that does not have a lower door sill. And the halacha is in accordance with the stringencies of both explanations of a widowed door. So what is this thing? It's a door that's made out of a single plank, right? So they didn't really cut a door and add other pieces to make it more door-like. And it doesn't have a lower door sill, right? So it's not closing at the bottom. That really feels like somebody just shoved a board into that opening to close it off, but not by closing a door, rather by sort of adding to the wall a little bit more wood. And that's the problem. We don't want that happening on Shabbos. Now that we're already talking, and by the way, I notice I'm wearing this shirt. We're definitely in fundraising mode. We share more Torah online than any other organization. It costs money to do that. And we are looking to you to become our partner with whatever you can give at donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. And another way to help support our nonprofit is to buy our merchandise at shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. This is a wonderful shirt. This is based on a line from Psalms. This is a day the Lord made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is selling very well in our store. The Wisdom Pillow is going gangbusters. People loving this pillow. I got to tell you, I was surprised. I love the design. It looks really good on the couch. But when it came, I was like, wow, this thing is really comfortable. I don't know if you can see there's like this texture to it that just makes it like very soft and comfy, and like it doesn't get hot. And I don't know what the material is, but I don't know what it is, but it feels very soft and organic. It probably isn't organic, but it feels that way. So highly recommend all these products. Our Grateful Yid shirt. We have new shirts for Hanukkah, Light It Up, and Let's Light Up the Darkness with the Hanukkah. And then the newest designs are Baruch Hashem and God bless. And they're available in sweatshirts and t-shirts and long sleeves and all kinds of things. Check it out at shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. All right, let me continue. So now that we're talking about this difference between construction or just closing a door on Shabbos, they're going to actually extend that idea to a few other activities that can come up on Shabbos where we don't want to mistakenly stray into what feels like construction. Now, the rabbis they're gonna push this a little bit, and it shows you that sometimes it's just very important strict rules to protect us from coming to violate biblical prohibitions, and sometimes it's ways to enhance our piety. Right? It really is. So we have this idea from Rav Yehuda. Not Rabbi Yehuda, but Rav Yehuda. So that's a later rabbi from the Gemara, the Talmudic period, as opposed to the Mishnaic period. And he says when he's making a wood pile for cooking on a festival, right? So now festivals basically have all the same prohibitions on labor as Shabbos, with one major exception where you can cook on a festival. You can cook on Passover, you can cook on Sukkot, you can cook on Shavuos, you can cook on Rosh Hashanah. You can't cook on Yom Kippur because, of course, we're fasting on Yom Kippur. But you can't do any of the labors of the week, just like Shabbos, but you can cook. So since you can cook, you can also light a fire. That is permitted. Although what we really like to do, you don't light a new fire. You transfer flame from an existing fire. That's the way we normally do it. So you are going to start a fire under your cooking pot. So Rav Yehuda is saying, well, if I have to, make a stack of wood underneath my cooking pot so that I can, make a nice cholent on the festival. He's going to cook on the festival, and this pile of wood, Rav Yehuda likes to not just throw the wood in a pile. Some people like to, like when you're building a fire in the fireplace, some people like to stack the wood neatly. It's going to burn faster and better. But if you're stacking logs for the purpose of a fire, well, you're kind of making a structure, and that could be considered building on Shabbos. Well, you have to make the wood pile so that you can cook. That's all permitted. If you have to make some kind of a structure, but you don't want to somehow be considered like you're building on Shabbos, how are you going to do that? So Rav Yehuda takes advantage of a principle that we've seen at other times. So for example, this is a lighter. On Shabbos, right, this has no permitted use at all. So it's a muktzah item. That means I don't touch it on Shabbos. But if it's resting on a tabletop, like the dining table, I don't want it on the dining table. Someone left it there by mistake on Friday afternoon. Now I want to move it. So I can move it. It's okay. If you need the place of something that is muktzah, you can move it. But what we like to do is to move it in an irregular fashion. If it's on the floor, I would just use my foot. If it's on the table, I need to move it. Instead of picking it up like this, the way I would normally pick it up when I'm using it, I might pick it up like this with my thumb and pinky, signaling to anybody who happened to be watching that I know this is a muktzah item that I shouldn't be touching. I just need to move it because I need its place on the table. So I'll move it in an irregular manner. Sometimes in Hebrew that's called a backhanded manner. Likewise, what Rav Yehuda would do when he has to build a fire, he needs to build a wood pile in a structure to make a fire for cooking on a festival. He builds it from the top down. How can you do that? How can you build from the top down? That's like one of those science fiction stories where everyone starts at their full height and they're just floating through the air, and then gradually their bodies grow and their feet reach the ground, but defies gravity. So how could you possibly do that? So what Rav Yehuda would do is he would start with the pieces of wood that are going to go on top, and with his foot, he would shove in the lower pieces of wood and then lower the upper pieces onto the lower pieces. And in that way, he's showing that he knows that, it's a kind of a structure, and he doesn't want to build a structure on the festival, just like he wouldn't on Shabbos. so he builds the top first. And you actually can employ this principle anytime you're making some kind of a pseudo structure, even though you're clearly not building a house or building a doghouse, or you're not engaged in construction. We're certainly not going to build a tent. We don't even open umbrellas on Shabbos because that's considered building a tent. But if you're going to make a pile of eggs, is that really a structure? No, but still, you can kind of enhance your piety by sort of holding the upper egg there first, moving the lower eggs into position underneath it, and then lowering the upper egg, which you've already put into position. Again, an irregular method of building so that you tip your hat to the fact that you don't want to engage in anything that even resembles construction on Shabbos or the festival. A heretic said, and I don't even know why we go to this next thing, with regard to bundles of thorns used to seal a breach. Now that we're talking about that we might use a bundle of thorns to seal a breach in a fence, apropos of that, there's a little incident that a certain heretic once said to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah, "Man of thorns." He called him a man of thorns, and it was meant to be an insult. And it was as if the heretic had looked into the Bible and he found something that he could use against the sages of Israel. So he looked into Micah, the prophet, in his book Micah 7:4, chapter 7, verse 4. It says, "The best of them is as a briar," B-R-I-E-R, which indicates that even Israel's best, even Israel's wisest sages are merely thorns. And so Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah basically said, "Thank you very much for the compliment. You've totally misunderstood the verse. If you would look down the page," in fact, he said, "Fool, go down to the end of the verse," and it says, "The most upright is worse than a thorn hedge." It's a derogatory expression meant as praise. What does it mean? It means, rather, what is the meaning of that the best of them is as a briar? It means that just as these thorns protect a breach, so the best among us protect us. So the idea here is that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah is saying, yes, our scholars are men of thorns, quite so. What does it mean? It means that we're surrounded, in this world by falsehood and lies and liars, right? People who go around the world saying there is no God, the world is a random, chaotic place, and they have all their proofs for why the Bible is nonsense, etc. And then along come Torah scholars who demonstrate the wisdom of Scripture, the wisdom of Torah, the ancient and eternal wisdom of these values that have been transmitted for thousands of years. And they indeed protect the Jewish people with their wisdom, and they're a thorn in the side of all those liars who would say, that the Bible is made up, etc. Our sages are a thorn in their side. So it's a compliment to be called a man of thorns. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananiah says, "Thank you very much. Yes, I am a man of thorns." Let's go on. We come to Mishnah number 10. This was a confusing Mishnah. I really had trouble with it. So I'm going to do my best to just pull out a few key concepts from Mishnah number 10. A person may not stand in the private domain and open a door located in the public domain with a key, lest he inadvertently transfer the key from one domain to the other. Likewise, one may not stand in the public domain and open a door in the private domain with a key, unless, in the latter case, he erected a partition 10 handbreadths high around the door, and he stands inside it. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. In other words, he can't stand in the public domain and open a key that's in the private domain. The worry is that in using the key in this way, he might come to transfer the key from the public domain to the private domain, or vice versa. Rabbi Meir says one workaround might be that you build partitions around the door, so when you're standing at the door, you're no longer standing in the public domain. You're in a private domain or an intermediate domain, the Carmelis. and you might keep the key there or over the threshold, and then you're protecting yourself against coming to transfer the key from public domain to private domain or vice versa. Second paragraph of the Mishnah, the rabbi said to him, there was an incident at the poultry dealer's market in Jerusalem where they would fatten fowl for slaughter, and they would lock the doors to their shops and place the key in the window that was over the door, which was more than 10 handbreadths off the ground, and nobody was concerned about the possible violation of any prohibition. And then Rabbi Yosei says, it was actually that place was a market of wool dealers. He adds that, and it gets repeated in the Gemara, that it wasn't the poultry market, it was the wool dealers market, but it's never explained why that's relevant to the discussion. So I guess to help us understand this Mishnah, the first thing to remember is that in ancient times, a key was not, a little brass thing on a keychain and you could put 20 of them in your pocket with no problem. A key was like a large object. It's about this big, with a big handle and a lever and wooden teeth, and you insert it and crank it around, and it was a much more substantial object. And so they would keep it typically in that window over the threshold. And then in the Gemara that discusses this, notes that when we're talking about Jerusalem, ancient Jerusalem, so like the old city today, it's surrounded by walls. And at that time, there were some doors in the walls of the city which were locked at night. So the whole city was surrounded by a solid enclosure at night, and that meant that the city was not a public domain, but rather an intermediate domain, a Carmelis. Later, when the walls of Jerusalem were breached and there were multiple openings, so now it was a place where many people are going all the time, and the city is not enclosed by a complete enclosure. And so now it's a different situation. It really is a public domain, and when you enter your shop or your house, you're entering a private domain. You're leaving, the streets are the public domain, and the stores and houses are a private domain. When the whole city's surrounded by a wall, it's that intermediate domain of a Carmelis. I'm just going to note those facts about this Mishnah. The discussion itself was just a little bit too complicated, I think, to be too inspiring. But what I do want to share with you is the final halacha, where the law came out. Just in case you're wondering, can you open a locked door on Shabbos? Now, if you live in a place with a community Eruv, you can carry your keys around with you. If you don't have a community Eruv, you cannot carry your keys with you. But you could hide a key on your property. Then could you use it to open a door? Yes, it is permitted, even if you're standing in a public domain, to lock a door in a private domain, as the halacha rejects Rabbi Meir's opinion in favor of the ruling of the rabbis. So we're not concerned, even if you're standing in a public domain and the door is a private domain and you put a key in the lock and lock it, we're not concerned that you're going to come to make a prohibited transfer on Shabbos. I'm almost done. Mishnah 11, I'm going to discuss a little bit more, but it's still a short discussion, and then I'm going to come to your comments and questions. So if you've got them, it doesn't have to be a question. Comments are good too. Put them in there, and I'm coming to the discussion. Mishnah 11, here on Daf Kuf Aleph, page 101 of Tractate Eruvin. With regard to a bolt that secures a door in place and that has a thick knob at its end, this is a useful implement for a variety of purposes. And the Tanaim disagree whether the bolt has the status of a utensil and one may therefore close the door with it, or whether it is considered a crossbeam, which would mean that doing so is classified as building. Rabbi Eliezer prohibits its use, and Rabbi Yosei permits it. Rabbi Eliezer said, an incident occurred in a synagogue in Tiberias, where they were accustomed to treat use of this bolt as permitted until Rabban Gamliel and the elders came and prohibited it to them. Rabbi Yosei says, the opposite was the case. At first, they were accustomed to treat the use of this bolt as prohibited, and then Rabban Gamliel and the elders came and permitted it to them. So the Mishnah is not that helpful. Which way is it going to go? So Rabbi Eliezer prohibits. Again, the hardware of ancient times is not like the hardware of today. Today, we don't think twice. Like, you have a deadbolt. Okay, so the deadbolt is attached to the door. There's a hole in the door frame. That's called the strike. And you just move the bolt into the strike, and the door is sealed. But back then, that would, that would like be, premium rich people hardware. And much more typical is a situation where the door is closed, you had a hole in the ground or a hole in the door frame, and you stick this bolt into it. There's actually a little illustration of that bolt right there. And it really is, it's just an iron rod with a knob on the end. So the question is, if you stick that iron rod with a knob on the end, into the hole in the floor or the hole in the door frame, and now the door can't open past it, did you just lock the door, or did you add to the house so that it was the prohibited labor of construction on Shabbos? Eliezer prohibits, Yosei permits. They both cite a story of when Rabban Gamliel came and changed the law, but, one thinks that Rabban Gamliel changed it to permit it. The other one thinks that Rabban Gamliel changed it to prohibit it. So we're not sure, what exactly is the situation. Like I said, this is similar to that case we encountered some months ago about the window shutter, right? Because ultimately what this is going to turn on is the bolt already attached to the house or to the door or not. If the bolt is just sitting around on the ground or on a table somewhere else, and you bring it over and now you attach it to the house, right, at the door sill or at the door frame, then that is like construction on Shabbos and it's prohibited. But if the bolt is already, say, hanging on a rope or a string that's near the door, next to the door, or on the door itself, then it's clearly intended for this use, and now you can slide it in. That's going to be permitted. Additionally, the fact that it has a knob on it does make it a utensil. So this is not muktzah. This is an object that has permitted uses on Shabbos. For example, you could use it to, what would you use it for? I guess I can't remember right now if you can break nuts on Shabbos. We've had that question so many times, and I'm just spacing, because you could certainly use this thing to break open some nuts. I think that the rule was you can do that if you're going to just break open a nut so that you can eat it right now. But what you cannot do is open a whole bunch of nuts, because that gets into food preparation. But just open a nut that you're going to eat. You could do that, and so you could use this thing as a nutcracker. So there you go. So it is a utensil, but it's still not going to be permitted to use it as a door bolt unless it was already attached to the door frame or to the door. And so it's interesting because it could be clearly made for that location, but they're going to require the attachment. That's where the halacha comes out. And that's unlike the window shutter that we studied some months ago, where the rabbis were okay with the window shutter resting on the floor, even though it wasn't attached to the wall or the window frame already. And maybe the difference is, the window shutter is clearly for that window frame, and this door bolt, since it can be used as a utensil, it has other permitted uses on Shabbos. Maybe that's why they're going to go that extra step and say it's not clear enough that it was fabricated for the purpose of bolting the door. We require that it's attached either to the door or to the house in order to use it to bolt the door and secure it in that fashion. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let me check comments and questions. Sharon Frant Brooks, prayers for the soul of my cousin who just passed away from COVID. Oh, Sharon, I'm so sorry to hear that. May you be comforted among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. May your cousin's memory always be for a blessing. And may they have may their soul have a great elevation in the world of souls. And we also say when we hear of a death, Baruch Dayan Emes, God is the true judge. We can't understand why people are taken when they're taken, but we trust God is a true judge, and there was a reason. Rochelle Rosen, storm windows, okay or not? Okay, so I'm assuming by storm windows, you're talking about like in Florida where they have hurricanes and there's those roll down shades. It would seem to me that that's fine because they're already attached to the wall at the window location and you're just rolling it down. It's the same as, really it's the same as closing window shades. Really, it's just a heavy duty window shade. If you're talking about something that you got to nail to the house to protect your windows, I would assume that that's going to be prohibited. Sharon says, do you move something in an atypical way if you are alone? I do. What you're really asking is the main issue appearance of impropriety or just the fact that we even for ourselves want to be engaged in moving something in an atypical manner? And I believe it's not just appearance of impropriety. I think it's that you want to do it in an atypical manner, just so that you wouldn't come to be, you don't want to accustom yourself to moving muktzah items as if it's during the week. Because if I'm just picking this up without thinking about that I need to pick it up in an atypical manner, now that it's in my hand, somebody rings the doorbell, I notice that a candle went out, and, without even thinking about it, I might light it. And if it was Shabbos, then I violated Shabbos. But if I'm holding it like this, that's going to be a constant reminder to myself to not use this item for its intended purpose, rather than I'm just moving it so that I have the use of its location. And Marie Claire says, I love listening to you. It's so relaxing. Thank you, Marie. Thank you. Thank you for the compliment. I hope that doesn't mean that I'm a soporific. That's just, you can use me to put you to sleep. I'm kidding. All right, my friends. Great to have you with us. As I mentioned earlier, a few announcements, right? Sunday is the Siyum of Tractate Eruvin, page 105. We're going to complete our journey through the third volume of the Talmud and open our journey of the fourth volume. We'll just read the first few lines of the next tractate, which is Pesachim, the laws of Pesach, Passover. We're in fundraising season, so if you believe in what we do, make it possible. Join the team, be our partner. Donate at donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. It's a huge merit to you for being our partner in this. We are a nonprofit organization, but we're sharing so much Torah with so many people around the world. When you enable that kind of Torah education, it really, resounds to your merit, both in this world and in the next. It will bring blessings into your life. Another way to support our nonprofit is with the AT merchandise at shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. Shirts like this, the Wisdom Candle Pillow, big hit. The Grateful Yid shirts, the new Baruch Hashem shirt, and the Hanukkah shirts are really going gangbusters. And we've also got sweatshirt versions of those, light it up and light up the darkness with a Hanukkah on it. So lots of really great designs there. Check it out, shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 102 at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. And then, of course, Friday, we're on at noon Pacific. Especially these days, we're headed toward the very shortest Friday afternoon of the year. In other words, when Shabbos comes in the earliest, I think here in LA, Shabbos is going to begin at we're going to be lighting candles at like 4:30 in the afternoon, maybe even earlier, 4:29, something like that. So Friday's always a rush, but we keep the show at noon Pacific on Fridays. That's what I've got. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers, and may you enjoy God's blessings for you, your loved ones, your friends, everyone. May your home be showered in blessings.